this is taking a little bit of time for you guys to write down. I think I have you write down a lot of it. The Spanish-American War, y'all, is fought both in the Pacific and the Caribbean. It's fought in 1 year, actually less than a year, just a matter of months in 1898. And when it's all over, the United States has gained colonies in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico being one, Guantanamo Bay in Cuba being the other, and a slew of islands in the Pacific. You know, eventually Hawaii, Wake Island, Guam, these islands are all acquired in the aftermath of the war. And of course, it's going to lead to us being much, much more heavily involved in Asia. Now, as you guys will see, there were some people who weren't really thrilled about this idea, because when you project your power out there, when you literally put your men and your ships and your soldiers away from this country, there's a greater chance, y'all, that something might happen that would draw them into war. And of course, when Pearl Harbor happens in 1941, it is an attack on one of those places that we had acquired in 1898, Hawaii. And of course, those islands we had to try to hold. And the thing is, y'all, to take back those islands was incredibly deadly and dangerous. You know, each of them were filled with Japanese, were determined to fight to the death. And we had to fight, you know, for every inch of those islands. So, you know, some of the people that had fear that this might be putting us in a situation for a future war did turn out to be right. Now, one of the more tragic things that comes out of this war too is what happens in the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, y'all, had belonged to Spain ever since Magellan had come through in the early 1500s. In fact, Ferdinand Magellan, whose crew was the first to sail completely around the world, he had actually died in the Philippines, but not before the islands were named after King Philip of Spain. And that is why they're called the Philippines, right? Now, the Filipinos had lived under Spanish subjugation as a Spanish colony for, at this point, almost 400 years. A lot of them weren't very happy. And so when we come ashore, they see us as liberators, Americans who are going to help free them from Spanish rule and grant them independence. But when they find out that no, America is just going to replace the Spanish, then they feel really betrayed. And a giant nationalist movement rises up. It's an insurgent movement, y'all, much like we used against the British, much like the Vietnamese would use against the United States in the 1960s in the Vietnam War. And it is an ugly, ugly, brutal war that America can't be very proud of. And in fact, more Americans ended up dying taking the Philippines from the Filipinos than died in the actual war, the Spanish-American War. Now, have y'all had time to get this written down? Because I know it's quite a bit. I'll give you another few seconds or something to do that, because I've had students all day saying, Mr. D, slow down. There's too much stuff. So, but this really, in a nutshell, y'all, is kind of the basics of what you guys need to know. Now, I'll give you more specifics with it, but it really kind of tells it what it is. America fights this war. We get this territory. We get more involved in Asia, and we have to crush a nationalist rebellion in the Philippines. Okay, can I advance? Can I beep it? Okay, there we go. All right, so let's look at the Spanish-American War here. Now, it's fought in 1898. That is definitely a watershed year in American history. Things change big time. We go from being a country that was really more concerned about, you know, domestic stuff to a country that starts getting involved overseas. Now, after we get these colonies, we'll kind of back off, and then we, of course, get tricked into World War I, or at least we saw ourselves as being tricked into World War I. Makes us very reluctant to get into World War II. But after World War II, we make a decision, y'all, that we're going to stay involved in European affairs. And, you know, had it not been for this war and this change, y'all, you wouldn't see all these countries today, or not countries, but you wouldn't see, for example, like the Ukraine really expecting America to do something, okay, about what's happening there. Now, what were the causes of this war between the US and Spain? Well, a lot of it had to do with how Spain was treating the Cuban people. The Cuban people, like the Filipino people, had been under the Spanish thumb for like 400 years. And, they had tried on several occasions to revolt, but unlike Mexico, unlike a lot of other countries that had won their freedom, Cuba just couldn't even do it. And, if you remember, y'all, several different times Americans had tried to take Cuba. We tried to buy Cuba, but the Spanish were not going to let it go under any circumstances. So with these revolutions or these rebellions that were going on, Spain sends a very, very cruel general by the name of Weyler. Now, Weyler gets down there and he decides to use some pretty brutal tactics against the rebels and against the Cuban people per se. For example, he rounds up the people from the villages, he puts them into camps. Now, because he's concentrating the population in these camps, he will call these camps concentrados. And of course, it is the ancestor of today's concentration camp. Now, unlike the Nazi concentration camps, which were, and the Nazi concentration camps, there were two kinds. People often forget that. There were extermination camps that were purely meant, y'all, to take people in and kill them as quickly as possible. There were other camps that were called work camps, where you might die, but they literally tried to squeeze all the work out of you before you would die. I'll never forget meeting an Auschwitz survivor one time and talking to him. And he said one of the craziest things I thought I'd ever heard. When he said, because we were there, we listened to this woman who'd been at the Nazi war crime trials, and she was telling about some of the horrible things she'd heard. And I was talking, and this guy was there, and somehow it came up that he was at Auschwitz. I was like, oh my gosh, you were at Auschwitz. Oh, and he said these words, Auschwitz wasn't that bad. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, in Auschwitz, you had a chance to survive. He said, in these other camps that friends and family members of his went to, you had no chance. You showed up and you pretty much died instantly. That wasn't the goal of the Spanish camps, right? But nevertheless, lots of people did die in these camps. Anytime you put a lot of people together, you're going to have outbreaks of disease. People are going to get sick. They're not going to be able to eat. And this little kid here, y'all, he may look like he's got a full belly, but this is one of the last signs of malnutrition. When the body and the stomach begins to bloat like that, begins to fill up, the kid is dying. In fact, probably didn't survive long after this picture. I forget how you pronounce it, but it's something like kwashiorkor or something is a disease that many people get. Rarely, y'all, do people die of starvation. They die because they get so weak that other diseases, opportunistic diseases, end up killing them before they physically actually die from lack of food. So pictures like this, y'all, began to reach Americans. And of course, just like the pictures of what's happening in the Ukraine are heartbreaking and make you and me want to do stuff, whether it's donating or whatever, to try to help the Ukrainian people. People saw these pictures and they wanted to do something to Spain to help free these Cuban people. All right, here's a picture of a Cuban man. And this too, y'all, looks like it could have come out of World War II. And so pictures like this really angered the American people and demanded that we do something about it. And of course, the yellow press, y'all, played a big role in that. The yellow journalists, the yellow press, who really used these stories to increase circulation of their newspapers. And sometimes they exaggerated, sometimes they plain out lied, y'all, to sell newspapers. And the worst case of that is going to be the sinking of the U.S. Maine that I'll talk about here, or the USS Maine that I'll talk about in just a sec. So there's Hearst, there's Pulitzer, the two most infamous of the yellow journalists. They exaggerated their news to sell more papers, to increase their circulation so they could charge more for ads. And so when the Maine blows up, without even knowing what caused it, y'all, they announced that it was the work of the Spanish, okay? When it might have been, an accident. I mean, things like this happen. And I'll tell you more detail later why it might have been an accident. They didn't wait. Immediately, if this happened, it had to be Spain. And of course, you charge up the American people. I mean, one of my greatest fears about this Ukrainian situation, y'all, is that it could go somewhere further. If, let's say, an American plane is shot down, or something happens that way, or some attack happens on an air base, you know, Americans will demand action, and it could get really nasty if that happens. These guys, they didn't care what they were going, what they were starting. They just, you know, exaggerated these stories to sell papers. Now, one example was the Delome letter. Now, Delome, y'all, was an ambassador to the United States from Spain. Now, he was writing a private letter back to his bosses in Spain. But the thing is, his secretary was very pro-Cuban. And so he noticed that in one of these letters, Delome had criticized the American president, McKinley. He criticized him. And so the aide, y'all, the secretary, made a copy of the letter and he leaked it to the Yellow Press, who published it. Now, there were many Americans, y'all, who did not like McKinley, just like there are Americans now who don't like Biden or who didn't like Trump. But what Americans don't like is when foreigners begin criticizing our president. I kind of think of it like family. You know, it's one thing for you to give your dad or your sister trouble, but if somebody else outside of your family makes fun of your sister or your family, then them's fighting words, right? And so we began to get really, really angry, and it turned a lot of people against the Spanish. How dare they criticize our president? That's our job, you know, kind of thing, okay? But there's going to be an instant cause that's going to lead to it. You know, usually, y'all, events have long-term causes, and then there's the thing that, you know, sets it off, right? The immediate cause that results in it. And the most important reason for the war is going to be the sinking of the battleship Maine, the USS Maine. Now, the Maine, y'all, was one of our better ships. She had, you know, been made just a few years before, and she is sent to Spain basically to be there to evacuate Americans. You know, kind of like if we knew something bad was going down in the Ukraine and we'd sent people there to help get our people out or anything like that. And also, y'all, it was sent to sort of project American strength. Now, many people thought it was a mistake. They thought it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull, that bad things would happen. And indeed, in the streets of Havana, before the Maine blew up, y'all, there were people drawing pictures of it blowing up. So it wasn't a big surprise when it actually happened. The question is, how did it happen? Now, so the Maine is sent to Cuba. It sails into Havana Harbor. Here you see her, quite modern ship for the time. And the day after Valentine's Day, February 15th, 1898, the Maine mysteriously and suddenly blows up. This may surprise you. How you doing? You okay? UIL? Okay, cool. The Maine mysteriously blows up. And here's some incredible animation of it, y'all. Here we go. That blew up real good, okay? Now, this is a very famous print made at the time that a lot of Americans would have had in their house. And it's quite dramatic. You see the Maine is stuck here, right? It's literally at anchor. It's not a threat to anybody. You see it blowing up. You literally see men being thrown in the air. Around 200 or so Americans died. And I mean, the wounds were ghastly, y'all. I remember one guy that was blown up. All he could identify him by, y'all, was part of his arm because he had the tattoo of his girlfriend on his arm. Some men were just literally vaporized. Hardly anything of them left. Now, after it happened, of course, rescuers went out there trying to save people. People were burning badly in the water and that. And the Spanish, to their credit, tried to help save some people. And, you know, we, the military authorities, we didn't immediately respond, but the newspapers did. Now, so why did it blow up? Well, some people think, y'all, that it was. Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million. Some people think it was purely an accident. Okay, this is what she looked like after she blew up. We call ship women. Okay, they're called she's, right? And the investigations immediately began, and there's been multiple investigations since, y'all. Some people say that the armor on the outside of the ship was blown in, which would indicate something outside the ship, maybe a bomb or a mine or a primitive type of torpedo. Other people, though, said that it had been blown outward as if something blew up inside. Okay, of course, it could have been a combination of the two things. But one thing, y'all, that is peculiar, when I read this in a great book I read called A Ship to Remember about the Spanish-American War, was that that they did this crazy engineering thing, which at the time nobody seemed to think was a bad idea, surprisingly. But they stored their ammunition, their gunpowder, let's say in a big, storeroom right here. Well, right next to it, y'all, was one of the coal bunkers. Now, coal has one job in life, and that is to burn, right? You leave coal for very long, and coal will just start burning. A lot of people don't know this, but Titanic, y'all, it had had a fire burning in the coal bunker pretty much since the ship had left. There are even some people that theorize, y'all, that the coal that was burning in Titanic in this one area weakened part of the ship and played some sort of role in its sinking. I don't believe that, but it is interesting to think they had a fire burning the whole time. Of course, the Atlantic Ocean put that out pretty quickly. But the thing is, they had this coal bunker right next to the ammunition. Now, you had to have a key to go into the ammunition. There were thermometers and stuff to check about the temperature. But some people, y'all, speculate that there might have been a fire in the coal bunker, which then warmed up the ammunition enough that the ammunition detonated, so that the Spanish would have had nothing to do with it. By the way, there was one interesting survivor. After several days, y'all, they found a survivor up in this crow's nest. It was Tom the cat. The mascot of the ship somehow had given up one of its 9 lives, and it had survived, and it was up there. Now, the sinking might have been accidental, but Hearst and Pulitzer, the Yellow Press, immediately blamed the Spanish. Now, President McKinley was seen by many people as kind of a wuss, that he wouldn't go to war with Spain. Now, the reason for that, y'all, is McKinley had been at the Battle of Antietam, the single bloodiest day in American military history. He'd been at Burnside's Bridge, and he said, I saw the bodies stacked as cordwood. And he knew what war was like. War is great until you actually have to be in one, and until you have to be one of the people being shot at. And so he delayed as long as he could, y'all. But the pressure put on him by the press and, by the people who had read the press was too much. And finally, President McKinley, y'all, had to go and ask Congress for a declaration of war. And perhaps the greatest slogan of all time for a war came out. After Pearl Harbor, we said, remember Pearl Harbor. We had remember the Alamo. But because of the Maine, we had a great abbreviation. Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain. See, if they'd sunk the Iowa, y'all, it wouldn't have worked. Remember the Iowa, to hell with Barcelona. It just wouldn't have worked quite as well. But fortunately, Maine and Spain rhyme, so there we go. And here you see the accusations in Hearst newspaper. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Assistant Secretary Roosevelt convinced explosion of the warship was not an accident. And they even hypothesized, y'all, by imagining that the Spanish had basically floated what they used to call a torpedo or a mine next to the Maine and had detonated it. Some people today even believe, y'all, it might have been the Cubans themselves in what today we might call a false flag operation, where you make it look like somebody else did something so they can get the blame. One of the theories that a lot of people had before Russia went into Ukraine, because Russia's done this before, is to have something happen to Russian troops or even Russian civilians and then blame it on the Ukrainians when actually it was Russians who did it to justify invading. So some people think that's what it could have been. Something like that is that even some Cubans might have wanted to do that. All right. Okay, so let's fight the war. This war, y'all, ironically, the first fighting takes place in the Philippines, not in Cuba, where the war had started with the sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor. The Philippines, y'all, shown in this box here, are located off the coast of China, south of Japan, multiple islands in this archipelago. And as I said, they belong to Spain since the time of Magellan, okay? Now, Assistant Secretary of Navy Teddy Roosevelt, y'all, really went further than he really had the power to do. But predicting that there was going to be war between the United States and Spain, he wanted the Spanish Pacific Fleet wiped out, y'all, before it could be used against Americans. So he dispatched Commodore Dewey of our Pacific Navy to sail with haste from Hong Kong, and Dewey did. His men, y'all, shaved their head so that the any injuries they might have to their head from shrapnel or something could be more easily attended to than having to go through all the hair. They threw off a lot of wooden furniture. They removed all kinds of fixtures, y'all, to make their boats as light and as fast as possible. And they headed to Manila while the United States decided about declaring war. Now, he arrives in Manila and he has special intelligence about where the Spanish strength is. There had been a spy for the United States pretending to basically be a wildlife enthusiast, I think it was maybe a birder, by the name of William Darty. Yeah, believe it or not. And Darty, y'all, had been pretending to draw pictures of birds and stuff, but what he was really doing, y'all, was locating where the Spanish fortresses were, where the ships were and everything. And so when Americans do come ashore, y'all, they've got very, very good intelligence. All right, so Dewey shows up, all right, and very quickly, Commodore Dewey, and a lot of people name their kids after this guy, y'all, because he was such a big hero of the time. He's been kind of forgotten today. There was briefly a picture of him. But anyway, he's on board the USS Olympia, the ship that I mentioned yesterday that I briefly worked on in Philadelphia, where she's moored today. But standing on this scaffold, he says to the captain of the ship, Dewey says, "You may fire when ready, Gridley." And Gridley, the captain, opens fire. And it's a massacre. In fact, it's probably one of the most one-sided battle in history. Everything the Spanish had would have been lost had we not worried about running out of ammunition and had to briefly break away. When it's all over, 6 Americans are wounded. Only 1 American is dead in this whole battle. And he had died in an interesting way, y'all. He was down below shoveling coal, and the heat got to him. He had a heat stroke, and he died as a result of that. No Americans died in the whole battle, y'all. And it was a great, great victory. We then proceeded, y'all, to invade the Philippines. Now, remember, the Filipinos thought we were helping them win their independence. And maybe we thought so too. But as events will turn out, we end up instead taking the Philippines for ourselves. So with Filipino help, we captured the Philippines and put up the American flag. Now, the war now shifts to Cuba. America had been blockading Cuba, keeping soldiers, keeping ammunition and stuff from reaching the Cubans. Americans had made their way to Tampa, Florida, and had made their way then to near Santiago. Now, they came ashore at a place called Daiquiri, okay? And Daiquiri would become famous, of course, for a drink that I think was the American ambassador or somebody down there got ice, he got rum, he got sugar, and made, of course, the daiquiri drink that is so popular among some people today. And some people say war never does anything good. But anyway, so they invaded Daiquiri, they fight battles outside Santiago, and eventually they make their way, y'all, to a place called San Juan Hill. Now, Teddy Roosevelt had since resigned being Assistant Navy Secretary and had gotten together a group of volunteers. Now, these volunteers, the only requirement was that you know how to shoot and you know how to ride a horse well. And he had a really motley crew. He had people from, Native Americans. He had people that had been polo players. He had, cowboys, all these different people. And they trained y'all and they met outside of San Antonio. And in fact, if you go to the Minger Hotel in San Antonio, which was there when Teddy was there, the bar inside the hotel is where they met. And it's filled with pictures of Teddy Roosevelt. I was even able to sit at the same table where Teddy basically signed a lot of the papers and did all of that. So they get them on the train, y'all. They send them down to Florida, but there's a problem. When they get to Florida, they find that there's not enough ships to take them all down there if they bring their horses. So the decision was made, y'all, that they would leave the horses behind. Only officers like Teddy Roosevelt would be allowed to bring their horses. So the Rough Riders really were more like the Rough Walkers. Now they charge up two hills, Kettle Hill, which had a large sugar kettle on top of it, as well as neighboring San Juan Hill. And I just so happen to have some rare historical footage of it here, y'all. Now that's General Shafter. Now, not only were Teddy Roosevelt's men charging up the hill, but African Americans under a colonel by the name of John Pershing. Now, John went by Jack. It's a short form of saying John. But anyway, because he commanded black troops and was a white man, they called him Black Jack Pershing, a nickname he kept for the rest of his life. And they also charged up the hill, but have not received a lot of the fame. Now, Germans had provided the Spanish, y'all, with Maxim machine guns. They even sent some men to operate those machine guns because they knew how to do so. Teddy was almost legally blind, y'all, and he kept several pairs of glasses that even had him sewn into his uniform. Now, that's the American version of the machine gun, the Gatling gun from the Civil War. Now, there's Pershing with his black soldiers, or as they called them then, his colored troops. Now, Pershing, y'all, would be the general who pursued Pancho Villa unsuccessfully in Mexico, but he also would be our commander of our forces in World War I. Probably with the exception of General Washington, there's never been a more beloved general in our army than Pershing. Now, this is going to make Teddy Roosevelt into a household name. He'll become a governor of New York and ultimately president or vice president of the United States. And when President McKinley is assassinated, he will become president of the United States for 7 years. Because once they get to the top of the hill, then you got the hand-to-hand fighting. The rifle Americans used, y'all, you fired one shot, you had to pull it back, then put it back again to fire the Craig Jorgensen. Looks like they're carrying carbines there, though. Yeah, that's a little carbine of some sort. That's what you would normally have in cavalry, right? A smaller rifle. Quoting Shakespeare, the St. Crispin speech from Henry V. Now that's a Gatling gun, right? That was a machine gun we developed during the Civil War. There you see the guy with the green cap, he's the German. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was an avid hunter and he knew about animals. In fact, if the Smithsonian found some animal, y'all, they couldn't identify, they would send it to Teddy Roosevelt, who usually could figure out what it was. Yeah, these are actually a couple observers. During war, y'all, you'll have people who come and observe war to learn things for their country.
General advance has been ordered on the Santiago Heights. Well, welcome to join me.
General Leonard Wood. It was general, it was colonel. Now that's General Wheeler. He'd been in the Civil War and he was suffering from malaria and his mind was kind of failing. And he kept saying, "Get them Yankees, get them Yankees," thinking he was still in the Civil War.
Very good, sir. Yes, sir. Second. Action left, stand one. Lock out, 500 yards. Number one. Stand for compliment.
Rough Riders have cattle, so now these guys are going up San Juan Hill. Now they found a German. Well, they picked up his Mauser rifle. All righty. See you guys later.
Like in the English. Put on diesel bumper. I got you on the right. Let it go in your mouth. Get right. Oh, urgency. I'll do Rita. That's the record. Gentlemen in England, line of men shall think themselves on trust. They were not here.
Now, so the last things to talk about here, and this is the more important stuff, but you guys will probably remember the other stuff long after you've forgotten that stuff, because that's the way it always is after we'd beaten Spain in this war, we had to really deal with do we or do we not take colonies after winning this war? Because remember, that's what was cool. That's what all the cool countries were doing. The cool kids were all taking colonies back in the day. Remember the idea that if you don't, you're going to be weaker than other countries and you're going to fall. Remember international Darwinism? Everybody needs to have colonies. Better to be a colony taker than a colony, you know, kind of thing like that. And so you had two groups of people, the antis and the imperialists, right? It's kind of ironic, and I thought this was in the video, but apparently not. But that the antis, y'all, they were anti-imperialists. Now, you know now, no group ever calls themselves anti-anything, right? They're always pro. It just sounds negative to say I'm anti something. So I guess these would be pro self-determination people, just like you don't hear pro-choice people saying they're pro-abortion, right? Or anti-life, anti-baby, right? And you don't hear anti-abortion people saying they're anti-choice. they're pro-choice, right? So everybody feels like they have to take, you know, the pronoun. Huh? Anti-Semitism, that's hatred of Jews. Yeah, hatred of Jews. That's a whole different thing. And I guess the people that are anti-Semites don't mind saying that they're anti in that case. They'd be like pro-hate. I'm not anti-Jewish. I'm just pro-hatred of Jewish people. Yeah. Anyway, so anti-imperialist, y'all. These people, one of the biggest things, and I'll go through in more detail, is they cited self-determination. They believe the people of like the Philippines, which was the big one under question, should have the right to decide their own fate. They shouldn't have the United States telling them what they need to do. Also, you had some people using race to also argue against taking over any colonies. Another argument was, look, America, going back to George Washington, was an isolationistic country. Remember George Washington during the French Revolution and the war between France and Britain had chose to stay neutral. There was a lot of pressure on him because the French had helped us in the revolution, that he stayed neutral. And so, you know, many people said, look, we don't want to be getting in battle overseas. And don't forget, y'all, the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. Remember, the Monroe Doctrine was basically a deal. Most Americans remember this part of the Monroe Doctrine. Europe's got to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Everybody remembers that part, but people forget the other half of it. America stays out of Europe and Asia, right? We stay out of your hood, Europe. You stay out of our hood, Europe. And that's kind of how it's supposed to work. And, you know, there was this real fear, if you start getting colonies and stuff off of the mainland, there's going to be a danger that somebody might come attack them. And what's that going to do? It's going to draw you into a war, which indeed it does, you know, in the Pacific during World War II. All right, so let's talk about the battle over this treaty, y'all, the battle over the Treaty of Paris. The people opposed to it were known as the anti-imperialists. Andrew Carnegie was probably the most famous. At one point, he volunteered to buy the Philippines for about $20 million and to give them their independence. The famous writer Mark Twain was a eloquent person opposed to the Treaty of Paris. Now, the treaty, y'all, just didn't end the war. I mean, everybody wanted the war ended, but like the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, do you want us to have to commit to this other thing? They go together. So some people fought over the Treaty of Paris because it was requiring us to give the Philippines money and then to take over and operate the Philippines as our own territory. The great progressive lady, Jane Addams, that we'll talk about, one of the leaders of the of Hull House, the settlement houses for immigrants and others like that, and later opponent of World War I, twice elected, although by separate terms. Grover Cleveland opposed it. So you had some famous people in this. Many people, y'all, thought, once again, it was violating the policy of isolationism, of staying out of Europe's wars. You know, and lots of times, y'all, people, I think, misunderstand what Washington said in his farewell address. People often misquote it and say that he said no entangling alliances. That's actually something that Thomas Jefferson, 2 presidents later, said. What Washington said is no permanent alliances, because the alliance we had made with France, y'all, was permanent. And, you know, that's just silly, because countries change. Your own country changes. Your priorities change. You know, it's as naive as when you're like in 5th grade falling in love and thinking it's going to last forever, or when you're like, you know, 30 or something. But anyway, you know, it's kind of naive to do that. And also, y'all, the idea, as I said, if you have these territories like the Philippines clear across the Pacific Ocean, that is really tempting for some other country to try to attack. And if they attack, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to get involved in a war. Okay. Now, you know, the situation with Ukraine right now is interesting, because a lot of us feel that, hey, we should be doing more. But a lot of us also are afraid if we do more, it could lead to a bigger war that could include us. So, but you know, the thing is, y'all, other small countries don't have to worry about that. You know, they're not losing sleep in Libya or in Cambodia about what's happening in Ukraine because nobody's asking them for their help, but America, because of this time period and after World War I and World War II, y'all, we've established ourselves as sort of the country that tries to stop this kind of thing. And so the thing is, it can get you into a war, you know? And so indeed, y'all, when the United States went to war with Japan, when Japan attacked another colonial possession, Pearl Harbor, the next day, the Japanese attacked the Philippines and invaded them and several other American possessions. So people were right about that. The other thing, like I said, is many Americans believed America should be a government of the consent of the governed. The people of the Philippines should consent to whatever situation. It shouldn't be something that America imposes. Also, a lot of people too, y'all cited history. The fact that America had been a colonial victim of the British. Remember, they told us who we could trade with, what our taxes would be, all those kind of things. And we had rebelled against it. Now, the irony is now we are going to try to do it to somebody else. Now, critics of that view would say, yeah, but America is going to be a kinder, gentler imperialist country. We're not going to be as mean as some of these others, right? And we were less mean than some other countries, but we still were an imperialist nation. And especially crushing the rebellion in the Philippines, y'all, was very, very ugly. More Americans, more Filipinos died. I told y'all some of the stories, right? Yay, nay, about some of the Filipinos and Americans that got, okay. Yeah, there was no quarter, y'all. There was no mercy on either side. You know, in a war that is fought by insurgents, you know, people that don't have uniforms, that don't follow the rules, oftentimes the people fighting them, they don't follow the rules either. It can get really, really ugly really quickly. And I'll give you just a couple of examples that I remember offhand. But there was an American who'd been captured by Filipino guerrillas. So they buried him up to his neck. They pulled his tongue out and they drove a stake through his tongue into the ground. So all he had was his head sticking up. Then they got a barrel of sugar, and from his tongue to the biggest anthill they could find nearby, they poured sugar so that the ants would follow the sugar trail, climb up into the dude's tongue and eat him from the inside out. Pretty nasty. Some other Americans that were captured were boiled alive, and their dog, I don't know if this is less merciful or not, but the dog had its eyeballs scooped out, and they put two little round stones there, and then let the dog find its way back, such as it could, to the Americans there as sort of a warning. And that's just a couple examples of Filipino atrocities. I mean, there were others that Americans did as well too. But anyway, y'all, so other people, y'all, use racial reasons why we shouldn't take the Philippines. Some people said these Filipinos, as people of color, as we would say today, had no place in America. America was predominantly, I would say probably 80%, 75%. We were a white Anglo-Saxon country, you know, Protestant, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And these people look different than us. There was a lot of racism about that. Do we want to add these people to the United States? There was also a fear of adding this many Catholics to the country. So some people, y'all, had some very noble reasons to be opposed to annexation of the Philippines. Other people may have been on the right side, but their reasons weren't quite so noble either, okay? So these are the reasons against it, okay? So what about the people for it? The pro-imperialists are just simply imperialist people, okay? And we're gonna look at these cartoons. I think I left a place for you here on these cartoons. And you know, I kind of want you guys to start doing some of your own analysis, and some of you can look at this different ways. When you zoom in on this, well, I guess I didn't zoom in on it here. You see San Francisco, and you see over here, Philippines, and I think Hawaii or something over here. What is Uncle Sam doing, y'all? He's literally spreading his influence. He is, you know, one person in another class said he's bringing them together. Another person pointed out, like, look, he's kind of having to stretch. Is this necessarily positive? Well, it could be, right? You know, or it could be like, uh-oh, Uncle Sam, you know, his cape is going over there. One leg is going to the Philippines. One is still barely touching America. He may be to the point of overreach. I mean, it's kind of up to you how you interpret this. I mean, looks kind of like he's almost having to balance himself. So, you know, different people, y'all, get different readings out of this. You just have to justify it and think of it that way, but that's definitely Uncle Sam. And then this is one we see of Uncle Sam. I really should get a better resolution for this picture here. But we see America as a baby. We see America growing up, right? Getting bigger here. And what is the increasing weight suggesting, y'all? What is that? What is that following? What are they saying is causing this weight gain? Imperialism. We're gaining territories. We are devouring other countries, y'all. You remember some people called this expansionism? Uncle Sam is literally expanding. Now there's a healthy weight and there's an unhealthy weight, right? Most of us would say that this isn't probably very healthy. So, you know, the photographer or the artist here, y'all, could be suggesting that Uncle Sam's maybe getting a little too big for his britches, okay? Although remember back then, they didn't think of anything of people being overweight, y'all. That was a sign of wealth and not having to work or anything. But anyway, so make your own interpretation of some of that, y'all. And then this one's interesting, okay? Here's one that shows William McKinley. That's the president right here. And as you guys will see from a quote I'll give you here in just a little bit, the whole issue of the Philippines really weighed on McKinley's mind. He was a very devoted Christian man. I do trust him in what he said. Some people are very cynical about him, but he really wrestled for a long time with what to do. Does he give them independence? He can't give them back to the Spanish, okay? Or does he make them a colony? What's interesting about this cartoon is when you look at the title, Civilization Begins at Home. Now, many people, y'all, had said that America owed this to the Philippines as good Christians, as good Western people. We had a duty to civilize these people, to uplift them from their primitive nature and all of that. Well, this cartoonist definitely has a different point of view about whether America should be giving lessons on civilization to Filipinos. So let's look at this picture a little bit more closely. There we see the president. He's looking at a map of the Philippine archipelago. And then we look here. I know it's kind of hard to see with this thing blocking it. Who is this woman supposed to represent? Justice, exactly, justice. And how do you know that, Justice? Because she's holding the scales of justice. And she also has the sword of justice, which has the word justice on it. Okay, so that kind of clues it in. It's kind of hard for you guys to see here, but something that's usually missing on justice statues. The blindfold. Why does justice wear a blindfold? Justice is supposed to be blind. It's supposed to be fair to all, right? And so it's supposed to not pick favorites. For whatever reason, this one doesn't have it, but she's definitely justice. When you look in the background, though, what do you see happening back here?
Injustice.
Somebody's being, you see injustice. Someone's being hanged, and these people are, for the most part, as far as I can tell, they're African Americans. Remember, after the Civil War, y'all, all kinds of things, the Klan, and that was still operating in the South. There were still lots of lynchings, illegal hangings of Black people in the South. So what is the irony here? What's the point of the cartoonist, do y'all think?
We're not civilized here in the United States. I'm not going to expect to be civilized.
Right. Yeah, we're not very civilized here. So how dare we be saying we're going to civilize somebody else? Or maybe we should be civilized here first before we start, you know, trying to tell other people that they're uncivilized, that we need to civilize them. So it's a powerful cartoon. And this would have definitely been an anti-imperialist cartoon, you know, saying, look, we have no business trying to do this to other people when we have our own problems of injustice here as well. Okay. Now, another cartoon here, and I think this is also on your paper, has to do with Uncle Sam here, y'all, being measured. Now, this is President McKinley right here. He's the tailor, and he's measuring him. Now, Uncle Sam looks pretty happy with his situation. Would y'all agree? Yeah, he's happily overweight, but they're having to fit him with a bigger suit. Why? Yeah, he keeps growing. He keeps expanding with more territory. Now, these people here, and I don't know if they're meant to represent anybody particularly, like, you know, is this supposed to be Carnegie and this is supposed to be Beveridge or somebody? I don't know. People back then might have recognized them. AP would probably label them if they thought you guys should know them, but they're bringing in an elixir. They're bringing in a diet drink, and it's called anti-expansion policy. Now, let's look at that drink there, anti-expansion policy. In other words, if he takes this, he can lose some weight. And so they're trying to keep him from growing, right? So what is Uncle Sam's response? Declined with thanks. The aunties are saying, you know, what do they say here? Here, take a dose of this and get thin again. Yeah, take a dose of this and get thin again. And Uncle Sam says, no, I never did take or have any of the stuff like that, and I'm too old to change, or something along those lines. Okay. So Uncle Sam has never, ever not expanded, and he's not going to change now, is what they're suggesting here by this cartoon, right? You see them measuring him here. Notice with the cloth, enlightened foreign policy, rational expansion, obviously suggesting that this is perfectly normal, and it's perfectly normal. Uncle Sam has always expanded, and he's going to keep expanding. Why change now? Okay. And so hopefully that kind of gives you guys enough to write there on these, and you'll see similar cartoons or a cartoon like this on the DBQ, y'all. All right. So proponents of the treaty, y'all, why would somebody be in favor of this? Well, there were economic reasons, right? You know, we needed it for trade. We need new markets to sell our stuff. We need new cheap resources to keep our economy growing. Okay. You know, that's an old-timey reason for imperialism. I mean, going back to the Greeks and the Romans, that's nothing new. Okay. That's what the British had done to us with mercantilism. We had to buy their stuff at their prices, and we had to sell our resources to them. Many Americans, and I know this sounds corny, and we today are more cynical, but many Americans did believe in like that lifting these people up, trying to Christianize them. Although ironically, a lot of them already were Christian. There were Muslims and still are in the Philippines. But remember, these were the wrong Christians. They were Catholic in our eyes. Another thing, y'all, is there was this idea that, hey, if we don't take the Philippines, somebody a lot worse is going to take the Philippines, and they will be much crueler to the people. So it's sort of the better us than them argument, okay? And that was another one that a lot of people had. And, you know, they were quite accurate, y'all. The Germans, and I know this could be surprising, the Germans were absolutely barbaric, y'all, to the people in Africa. You know, a lot of people think, oh, that's just a World War II thing. That was just Hitler. No, sadly, y'all, a lot of European powers, the Belgians, the French, the Portuguese, the Germans were incredibly cruel to the African peoples that they subdued and took over. And, you know, and the Germans were then too. So the idea was, hey, we'll take them over. We'll rule as enlightened as we can. It'd be much better than, say, Belgians or Germans or French people taking them over. So this is a quote from President McKinley. Like I said, some cynical people today look at this and like, oh yeah, right. But he did say this. He said, he'd been praying and thinking about this for a long time. And he said, I went down on my knees and I prayed to God for light and guidance. And one night it came to me this way, that we could not give them back to Spain. In other words, give the Philippines back. That would be cowardly and dishonest. Think about it, y'all. We'd spent a lot of money. We'd spent a lot of lives, what we call blood and treasure, to take them and then just give them up, right? There was nothing left for us to do but to take them all. That is, all the Philippine Islands, all of these places, to educate the Filipinos. That's how you spell Filipinos. Uplift and civilize and Christianize them. Once again, kind of ironic since most of them are already Christian. And by God's grace, to do the best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. And then I went to bed and I went to sleep and slept soundly. So it's like he got his answer. And that's why he chose to go ahead and take them. Now, like I said, cynical people, us today, we're a lot more cynical about motives of people and things than people were back then. But that's how he felt. Okay. Now, when it comes to actually vote on it, y'all, it is down to a handful of people. Now, treaties have to be approved by the US Senate. It's not a 50-50 vote, y'all. It's not a simple majority. It is an absolute majority. 2/3 of a vote are required to pass, y'all, a treaty. So the Republican McKinley, y'all, is going to need Democrat votes. And ironically, William Jennings Bryan, who had been his opponent, right, in 1896, and I think in 1900 would be as well. Bryan, y'all, he decides to get several Democrats to support the treaty. Why? I guess he was kind of going with the better us than them. If we get the treaty, maybe eventually it will give true independence. Maybe we will give independence to them. And within about 42 years, y'all, we were supposed to give independence, but then World War II happens, and the Philippines end up not getting their independence until the year after World War II in the mid-40s. So the thing is, y'all, the treaty passes by a single vote. A single vote. I don't know what would have happened, y'all, if it failed. I guess we would have just let the Philippines have independence, but would we have done like a Cuba kind of thing and said they were protectorate, and if anybody else came to get them, we would defend the islands? I mean, kind of getting all the cost of being an imperial power without the benefit of it. Okay, that kind of covers up most of what y'all need. Is that, so yesterday you guys saw the end of the war. You saw the taking of San Juan and Kettle Hills, which made Teddy Roosevelt into a famous person, as you guys will see, and ultimately into president. That's definitely one of the many results out of this war. But as my tie shows you today, it shows Uncle Sam sitting on top of the world. And America had emerged to become this, I don't want to say we were not yet a superpower as we would be after World War II, but we were now an imperial power. We had joined that imperial club. So what you see here, y'all, is Spain loses its empire. See the Spanish flag going down, and America gains it. So there we go. There goes the American flag of the time. Okay. So what does that mean? Here are some of the territories that we gained. We gained the Philippines, which of course, as I said, would be a big part of World War II, both the loss and then the retaking of it by General MacArthur. The terrible Bataan Death March occurred there. Puerto Rico, over here in the Caribbean, where I did live briefly as a child, okay? Have a lot of fondness for Puerto Rico still to this day. And of course, the island of Guam. These are the American possessions. Now we go ahead, as you guys will see, and eventually Hawaii is obtained and some other places as well too. Remember, the goal was to get these bases for ships to land, to project American power, to have coal and all that stuff. Now, Cuba's situation, y'all, is a little bit more complicated, okay? Now, I don't know if you guys remember before the Mexican War, but before the Mexican War, there was a guy who proposed that, you know, because a lot of people before the Mexican War believed the whole Mexican War was all about trying to capture more land for slavery. And so this guy made a proposal. It didn't pass the Senate, so it failed. But he said, look, if slavery isn't your goal with this territory you're going to get from Mexico in this war, then you won't mind saying no slavery in any territory occurred that we acquire from the war with Mexico. So the same kind of thing happens here with the Teller and the Platt amendments, okay? Now, what we said was, look, a lot of people believe the whole purpose in this war was for the United States to acquire Cuba. So one of the agreements was no territory that we get in this war will become American, or no Cuban territory, that Cuba will maintain its independence. So what Cuba becomes, y'all, is what we call a protectorate. It was under American care. America had the right to intervene. And essentially, y'all, this is how Cuba remains until 1959 when Fidel Castro takes over. So for about the next 60 years, Cuba will remain not a state, not a territory, not a colony, but definitely a country that really kind of took its orders from us, kind of a satellite. But there is a place that we got that we still have to this day. This is called Guantanamo Bay. Now you can see where it's located. Now people in the Navy, they call this Gitmo, right? Instead of Guantanamo, they call it Gitmo. If you have any friends in the Navy that have ever been stationed there or relatives or something, if they say Gitmo, they're talking about Guantanamo Bay. Now it's a very small area. It's a naval base. It's fenced off from the rest of Cuba. And of course, it's gotten a lot of notoriety in the last few years because does anybody know what's in Gitmo? What do we keep there? Prison. It's a big prison for a lot of the terrorists who fought against us in Afghanistan, and even for some of the people who were part of the 9/11 planning, you know, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right? I think KSM is what people call him. He was there, and there's been allegations of, you know, torture or whatever of some of these people. Several presidents have said that they were going to close Gitmo, not the base, but close the prison there. But the thing is, nobody really wants those terrorists to be in an American prison. I mean, would you guys want them to be in Huntsville or something? Or, you know, down here, trying to think of the name of the place on the highway down 288. That's also a prison. Nobody really wants these guys. So even though Gitmo is ridiculously expensive to maintain, Americans still aren't really willing to close it. Obama said that was like the first thing he was going to do. Well, he was there for 8 years and wasn't able to do it. Biden, I'm sure, would like to do it, has not been able to do so.
We don't close it.
Well, because who really wants those terrorists moving here, right? They would have to be relocated here. And a lot of people aren't very comfortable with letting them go, right? We've let a lot of them go, and I don't know how many are still actually there, not very many, but it does cost a lot of money to keep them there. Imagine everything has to be brought in there. You know, it's very expensive.
Probably the U.S. really wants is also getting to Cuba.
Yeah, exactly. So Guantanamo Bay is still part of the United States. Just a tiny, tiny bit of Cuba, y'all, but that comes out of this war, and it has implications even for today. Now, also, the Panama Canal. I know I kind of talked about it out of order, and I hope that doesn't confuse y'all. Remember, the war happens before the canal, but many people like Alfred Thayer Mahan had already talked about the need to have some kind of canal. And the war really demonstrated this. The battleship Oregon, y'all, I think it went from what, Seattle or something, all the way over to the Caribbean. It took weeks and weeks for it to do so. And it really pointed out the need to have a canal. So just 5 years, y'all, after the war is over, we begin building the Panama Canal. And of course, we finish it in time for World War I in 1914. All right. The other thing, y'all, is this man, the Rough Rider, becomes famous. He becomes a household name. He gets elected to become governor of New York. Okay. And then William McKinley, when elected to his second term in 1900, selects the very popular Teddy Roosevelt to be his vice president. Now, we'd only had 2 presidents assassinated, and nobody was thinking we would probably have a third or a fourth president assassinated, hopefully. And so, sadly, although it turns out to be good for us, a lot of people don't ever consider who we pick for vice president. They're often picked, y'all, to win an important state or to balance the ticket ideologically, a liberal and a conservative and a liberal. And so when they pick McKinley as president, and then, as the Republican nominee, and then he picks Teddy Roosevelt because everybody loved Roosevelt, little did they know that McKinley would only be in office for about a year before he was shot and killed, and Teddy Roosevelt becomes the new president. And what a president he was. Do what?
Wasn't McKinley shot by an anarchist?
He was shot by an anarchist.
Who's and basically, I think I read on this, basically, these guys okay, do not come, you should add more security to your staff because there's been a lot of people, important leaders, been dying of anarchists recently. And what he does add it, and then the guys McKinley's no, I think it'll be fine. The guy anyway adds extra staff, and then he gets shot anyway.
Yeah, and the Secret Service guy had kind of been pushed to the side, right? The anarchist came up with a gun, kind of hid it in his hand, and he had his hand all bandaged. Now, if you guys have ever met somebody who, wasn't able to use a hand or something, and, you give a handshake, you kind of do this pause thing, right? Like, okay, should I shake their left hand? What should I do? And so poor old McKinley, y'all, he kind of offers his hand, and then he sees the guy has his hand wrapped up, and the guy basically puts his hand right near McKinley's stomach and opens fire and hits him in the gut, and it does incredible damage to a lot of his organs. Now, this says a lot about McKinley. I don't know about you guys, but if somebody shot me and I see the Secret Service police getting the guy, in fact, it was an African-American guy who was standing nearby. He's actually an unemployed man, but he wanted to meet the president. He is like the first to tackle the guy, right? And everybody proceeds to beat up the anarchist. Leon Kolgas is his name.
Polish? He's Polish, right?
I don't know if he's Polish, but he was Eastern European.
He thought he'd exhort the cause, but that's an idiotic move. One of the most important figures in the world. Oh yeah, anarchy's gonna become more important. No, that's like communism.
Yeah.
Communism.
No, that's exactly. It didn't do a whole lot for the cause, but you're right.
Worse.
Throughout Europe, anarchy had been happening. So the bullet, does take McKinley's life. But what I was going to say was, as the guy was being beaten up, McKinley, y'all, was still conscious. And these are the words he said: "Don't hurt him." Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody shoots me, I want to be saying, hit him for me, hit him a couple times, kick him in the, whatever, right? But McKinley was basically a good man and didn't want the guy hurt. Now, ultimately, that assassin, Leon Kolgas, would be charged with murder. He would be found guilty. He was executed. And then get this, y'all, they destroyed his body in acid because they did not want his grave to become like a center for anarchists to meet, And so they literally destroyed his body. He has no grave. All right, taking the Philippines. Now, Filipinos, remember, y'all, had helped us defeat the Spanish, believing that their country would be free. But then the United States made the decision with the Treaty of Paris by a single vote that we would make the Philippines into a colony, okay? That we would take it over. Now, the Filipinos feel betrayed. Now, America had lots of reasons, some of them good for taking the Philippines, some of them bad for taking the Philippines. But the thing is, America now has to subdue the Philippines. Now, this war was a very, very brutal war. It's an insurgent war. It's not like, the enemy is over there and we're over here and they're wearing uniforms and we're wearing uniforms. This was a war, y'all, a guerrilla war where Americans could be attacked wherever. I'll just give you guys a couple of the stories that I remember. One American that had been captured, y'all, was buried up to his neck in the dirt. They then pulled his tongue out, right, as far as they could, and they nailed a stake to it into the ground. Then they poured sugar from his mouth all the way to a big ant bed. So what was the purpose there? the ant shaw would follow the sugar trail, come up and eat him from the inside out. It was awful. You know, people just absolutely killed and tortured in terrible ways. I remember one attack on a group of Americans. These Americans have been caught by surprise. They were boiled to death, and the dog was saved. They had a mascot dog, but they gouged out the eyes of the dog and they put 2 rocks in there in place of it, and then let the dog wander back to where it was, as sort of a warning. So this was an ugly, ugly war. Very, very much like what happens in Vietnam. Many people compare the war in the Philippines against the Filipinos to be much like the war that we fought in Vietnam, where, you know, neither side, y'all, was very, very decent to the others. Okay. Now, the man who leads it is Emilio Aguinaldo. Okay. Now, Aguinaldo later has kind of a bad history. When the Japanese invade the Philippines, he thinks that's a good thing and cooperates. Other people say that he was kind of forced to cooperate with the Japanese because, of course, the Japanese, y'all, turn out to be a much, much worse colonizer than the Americans ever were. You know, sadly, some Asians believe, well, because they're fellow Asians taking us over, they'll treat us better than the Americans did. Well, guess what? The Japanese were even crueler, much crueler than the Americans could ever dream about.
Did they not see like what happened in Nanking?
Well, they should have known what happened like at Nanking, exactly, literally the rape of a city. And many people compare this Filipino war, as I said, this crushing of this insurrection, which took all of 3 years, y'all, to our experience in Vietnam, trying to put down the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese communists who were trying to defeat the South Vietnamese government that was supported by the United States. It was that same kind of war that just didn't have front lines or anything, and that people that could pretend to be your friend today at nighttime became your enemy.
I'm just like, is Vietnam still communist? Like,
Yes, Vietnam is still communist.
And nothing's the U.S., so it's like it's not that. That's why they're not really mentioned that much anymore.
Right. Yeah. President Clinton.
Unlike North Korea and Cuba.
It's communist, but not, say, as harsh as, say, Cuba is, or North Korea is, or China, definitely. Now, here are some more events, terms, and stuff you guys should know for STAR purposes as well as AP purposes. Okay. Now, a couple other things. I've mentioned this before, but Alaska was purchased in 1867 by President Johnson's Secretary of State, Seward. Now, Lincoln had picked Seward. If you guys remember, before the Civil War, it was Seward who talked about a higher law than the Constitution, a law that banned slavery, in his mind, biblical Christian law. He had survived an assassination attempt. In fact, his face had been horribly mangled. He looked like a jigsaw puzzle with a couple of pieces gone. And as Secretary of State, he bought Alaska, which belonged to Russia, for $7.2 million. It was supposed to be $7 million, but the Russians at the last second near Sitka forgot to include this big mining area, or not mining, lumbering area, and they added the 0.2 to it. I actually went to see that little spot when I was up in Alaska. Now, why would Russia do this? Well, to them, there was nothing in Russia. We hadn't discovered the oil there. The Russian Tsar was terribly in debt. Alexander II, I guess this would have been, was in debt, and so they sold it to us. Thank goodness. Can you imagine today, y'all, if the Russians had Alaska? I mean, that would be a whole different thing. And there is the check that for $7.2 billion to buy it. Now, believe it or not, just as many people criticized the Louisiana purchase, many people considered this a big mistake. Seward was made fun of. They called it Seward's icebox, that he's getting absolutely nothing. Some people called it Seward's folly. And of course, it turns out to be one of the best deals our country ever got because of the enormous wealth there. And I don't know if you guys have visited Alaska, but hopefully someday you will. It's absolutely beautiful. Talking about cruises, taking a cruise up along the inner passage up there is a really, really cool thing, not just for old people. So there we see Alaska. And remember, y'all, Alaska has this panhandle that comes down along Canada. So it's more than just that. And you look at how close it is to Russia over here. In fact, we had a presidential or vice presidential candidate a few years ago who used to joke that she could see Russia from where she lived, okay, in Alaska. All right. The other place that we acquire is, of course, Hawaii as well, too. Now, this is in the same year as the Spanish-American War, but it happens under different circumstances. Now, I have not been to Hawaii yet, y'all, but for a small tax-deductible contribution, you could make that dream a possibility for Mr. D. Just go to no, anyway. But I would love to go to to Hawaii someday. Hopefully, maybe for my wife and I's 25th anniversary coming up in a couple of years, we can do that. She's been, but I haven't. And you can see it's way out there in the middle of nowhere, right? And there we go. Let's zoom in. Let's make it bigger. There you go. You see a series of islands out there. All right. So what's the story of how we got Hawaii? Well, Hawaii was under a monarchy. There was a queen who has one of the coolest names ever, Queen Liliuokalani, okay? And a couple of different attempts were made to remove her from power. Ultimately, she was removed from power, not killed or anything, but was dethroned. And Hawaii then asked to be annexed in 1898. Now, the story is somewhat more complex than I've made it out to be. One of the things, y'all, that was going on is Hawaii was a big sugarcane producer. Well, of course, we wanted our sugarcane producers to do well. So we had very, very high tariffs against Hawaiian sugarcane coming into our country. And so the sugar growers, who were like the children of the Christian missionaries who'd done that before, they wanted to be able to make Hawaii part of the United States so there wouldn't be those high tariffs against Hawaiian sugar. So that's one reason they wanted her gone. One of the people behind all of this, and I didn't put this on the PowerPoint, but you guys should know because he appears on the STAR exam sometimes, was a man by the name of Dole, okay, Stanford Dole. I nearly went blank for his name. If you guys have ever like bought bananas that say Dole on them, we're talking about one of the ancestors, one of the relatives behind the massive Dole family, fruit company, right? You know, you'll see Dole canned goods, you see all of that. So remember Stanford Dole, associate him with Hawaii's annexation, and you guys will get that question right on any STAR test. Huh? And George O'Keefe. Okay. Now, here's another phrase you guys need to know. This is speak softly and carry a big stick, or sometimes it's phrased to speak softly but carry a big stick. Well, we'll get to that. Yeah. Now, Teddy Roosevelt's foreign policy earned the nickname of Big Stick Diplomacy. All righty? Yep. So there you see Teddy Roosevelt, y'all, carrying the big stick. Now, this was based on an African proverb. And the idea is you can speak softly, you can be nice to people, but let them know that if they don't do what you want, you got the big stick ready just in case. People are going to respect and listen to you more knowing if you have a big stick. So what was the big stick? The big stick, y'all, was mainly his Navy. He had an incredibly large Navy built up called the Great White Fleet. The ships were all painted beautiful white. They sent them all around the world. They toured everywhere and let people of the world know America was bad. Bad in the sense of good, that kind of bad. Basically, that America was powerful, that we had one of the largest navies in the world. We were behind the British, we were behind the Germans, but we were probably the third largest navy in the world. Very, very modern navy. And so this would project American power, y'all. In a way, like if we had a bunch of bombers flying all over the world, with atomic weapons, letting people know. Now, if you spoke softly, but you had this military power behind you, you would go far. You know, speak softly, carry a big stick, and you will go far. So please remember the phrase big stick diplomacy, okay? And associate it with Teddy Roosevelt. And there you see him walking around with that big stick. You see eagles flying back here. Notice how the Caribbean, y'all, in this picture is made to look like just kind of a wading pond, right? Just kind of like a little hot tub or something like that. You know, and you see here debt collection, sheriff, that kind of thing. Now, if countries owed us money and they didn't pay that money back, we would go there, we would take them, hold them until and collect tariffs until they paid that back.
Okay. After we say, and then we bring up big sticks.
Yeah. So here's just some pictures of that. There you see the big stick. Okay. There you see the debt collection, sheriff, those kind of things. Okay. Receiver. More close-ups of it here. Mr. D kind of went crazy with it. Now, the next thing you need to make sure you know is what's called the Roosevelt corollary. Now, understand it is not the same thing as a coronary. That is a heart attack, right? The Roosevelt corollary, y'all, is his addition. A corollary, y'all, is like an extension or an addition to something that already exists. And what he's going to do is he's going to add to Monroe's doctrine. Now, if you guys remember a few months ago when we were talking about the Monroe Doctrine, Monroe basically said, look, Europe, you stay out of the Western Hemisphere and not colonize it, and we will stay out of the Eastern Hemisphere. We'll stay out of Europe. That's your hood. This is our hood. You stay out of it. Teddy added to the Monroe Doctrine. This is basically what he said. Only the United States would have a right to intervene in Latin American countries. What had been happening, y'all, was other countries like Germany and others to which money was owed would sometimes try to come into some of these countries and collect their debts. He said, look, that's our job. You have a problem with any Latin American countries paying their money back to you, you talk to us, we will get it. This is our neighborhood. You have no right to do it. And this policy, y'all, is still in effect today. It's been invoked relatively recently when the Russians sent modern backfire bombers to Venezuela. We used it in the 1980s in 1983 when we invaded the island of Grenada, which Cubans were building a base that Russian bombers could use in Grenada. They were building an airfield there. We've invoked it several different times because, you know, that is a big, big part of our foreign policy. So if you guys are ever asked to talk about foreign policy, you got to talk about the Monroe Doctrine and its corollary, the Roosevelt, the addition to it. Here we see Teddy Roosevelt with a cannon, y'all, pointing it at some leader here, some European king who has these claims. And of course, very stereotypical image of a Hispanic person. I mean, this is pretty offensive to look at today. But here we see what is today called the Dominican Republic. It was still going by the term Santo Domingo, which is its capital today. But here you see the Great White Fleet, Teddy Roosevelt's gunboat diplomacy, basically telling the Europeans, hands off the Latin Americans.
I feel like Teddy Roosevelt was like the one it's like a common president where he's one of everyone's favorites.
A lot of people do like him. Others, of course, don't as well. But
I mean, this man did a lot of things for fun. Let's just say that
he did, and he's often portrayed. Teddy Roosevelt's often portrayed as kind of a buffoon, kind of a silly person. But the thing is, he wrote more books. He wrote more books than most people read in their lifetime.
Natural parts.
Yeah, a lot. He did a lot, and we'll get into the conservation when we talk about progressives. That was one of his biggest legacies. That's why he's up on the mountain and Mount Rushmore. But he also, you know, he read. He was fluent in multiple languages. He was an expert in no telling how many different.
Navy just to join the army. Fun.
Yeah. Now, here is a very, very famous political cartoon. I don't know if I got a chance to put this all together or not. I remember seeing this as a kid in books, y'all, and wondering what's going on. You'd be very likely, y'all, to see this in some type of AP type question, showing you what it is. Now, here, of course, his police baton, his nightstick represents what? The big stick, exactly. The new diplomacy, it's called, right? And of course, who is that policeman? Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah. What does it say?
Because we're a bit.
Oh, okay. All right. You mean some of the stuff's out of order or something?
It's out of order.
Okay. Hopefully we'll come back to that then and you guys will see that. So here we have Europe. We even have some Asians back here. It looks like some Turks. You've got the Russians. You've got John Bull representing Britain. And, here we are. We're being the world's constable, the world's policeman. Now, this was a big step, right? That America was now basically going to be the policeman of the world. We would try to regulate what happened around the world. That's a big burden, right? And it's one that we still see people assuming that America should be doing it, like what's going on in Ukraine right now. You hear people like, hey, the United States should be doing something. We should be helping them. You don't see anybody saying, hey, what's Libya doing? Hey, what's Lesotho doing, or something like that. But it is the United States. We have taken on this responsibility, and this is when we did it. So let's look here and see if, sadly, there's some of the stuff. You see arbitration, right, where you sit people down, you do that. Right here it says, tell your troubles to me. TR is what his badge says there, in case you're not sure who that is. Okay. All right, there we see, once again, a caricature, a stereotype of Africa, well, in this case, of Latin Americans, right? You've got the Philippines down here. You've got Central Americans. You've got Colombians, Brazil, all these different people. You have the Turks over here, right? Very stereotypical pictures for us today.
Hang on, wait. We didn't show something right there. The guy holding the book.
What guy holding a book?
Right next to Turk.
Right next to the Turks. Yeah, I'm not sure.
He's holding it with that with the left. No.
It says Asia. Yeah, it just says Asia on there.
I don't know.
Okay. And then here you see my fishing boat. Okay, not exactly sure what that means. Maybe they're only fishing, right? Yep, that's Britain. That's John Bull. Then you see the Russians with their beard, of course, and that kind of thing. You see the French, even the Japanese. It looks like the Chinese back here. Germans, okay, as well too. There you go. Controversy is what that book says. Okay. And you see the new diplomacy. You see dispute between nations. So the United States, y'all, is going to become the arbitrator. We're going to become the fix-it kind of guy. And in fact, y'all, Teddy Roosevelt is, until President Obama, was our only president to ever win a Nobel Peace Prize. Teddy helped negotiate an end to the war between the Russians and the Japanese, the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. He had them over in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they negotiated a treaty. And for that, he won a Nobel Peace Prize, y'all. Very, very distinguished thing to do. And so, we are seeing ourselves as sort of this guy that's supposed to solve the problems of the world. This is a big step in just a few years, y'all, going from being an isolationistic nation who trades with the world but doesn't want to have any treaties or alliances or get involved in any of their wars, to a country that's very, very much involved.
I feel like the U.S. now is about to isolation.
A lot of people think we should maybe stay out of other people's affairs too. All right, now intervention in Latin America. Using the Roosevelt corollary as a justification, the U.S. has been very, very involved in Latin American nations, right? Usually not to the best of effects there. You guys already remember, I mentioned after our sailor was seized in Tampico and roughed up, we invaded and occupied Veracruz in what was called the Tampico incident. There you see the battleship Texas, the way she used to look when she participated in that occupation of Veracruz. Remember in 1916, General Pershing, who you guys saw in the Rough Riders excerpt the other day, by now he was a general. He chased Pancho Villa all around. This was back in better days before they became enemies. That was another incursion. Colombia, definitely when we incited the revolution in Panama to get the territory to become the Panama Canal. We occupied the Dominican Republic, or Santo Domingo as they called it then, y'all, for basically 7 or 8 years. It was unstable. And we even, again, y'all, in the 1960s, we got involved as well, too, down in the Dominican Republic. Nicaragua, in the 1920s, Americans went down there to fight against rebels, the Sandino rebels. And over time, y'all, when in 1979, Nicaragua fell to a communist government and under, I'm trying to think of the guy's name, Daniel Ortega. And it was led by a group known as the Sandinistas. They took their name after that rebel, Sandino. And so the United States didn't want a communist government in Central America. And so we funded a group of people known as the Contras. Contras meaning against. The Contras, y'all, being based out of El Salvador, carried out a guerrilla war against the communist government of Nicaragua. Ultimately, elections were held and Ortega was defeated, although ironically, he's come back to power a few years ago. He's more moderate now, but at the time, the United States was very, very much involved in supporting El Salvador and keeping it from becoming communist while trying to overthrow the communist government of Nicaragua. Haiti, of course, has been occupied several times by American forces, trying to provide some stability there as well, too. Most recently, when one of their leaders was replaced and it got awful down there. Even as recently as the Clinton days. And Cuba, y'all, Cuba has been a very, very focal point of U.S. intervention. Under the Platt Amendment, which was basically gave permission for the United States to intervene in Cuba if it became unstable or dangerous. The United States has supported dictators in Cuba until eventually Fidel Castro took power in 1959. Here you see Che Guevara. Probably you guys have heard of Che Guevara before, but that's his Argentinian doctor supporter in his revolution. I didn't mention too, y'all, in 1954, we helped overthrow the Guatemalan government, which had elected a socialist. In the 1970s, we helped overthrow a Chilean government that also had elected a socialist by the name of Allende. And so America has been involved in many times in the internal affairs of these countries. And it explains possibly, y'all, why a lot of these countries don't really hold a very high opinion of us, because they see us as sort of a bully that tells them what to do, and often with some pretty disastrous results as well, too. So this, America, using the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, has justified, being very, very involved in Latin America. And of course, as I said, this has left a real sense of distrust and hatred of Norte Americanos or of the Yankees. And I remember as a kid in Puerto Rico, seeing signs, about Yankee go home, seeing very anti-American signs and protests around the place. I've seen protests when I traveled against the United States because they see us, y'all, as, like I said, in many cases, as a bully that just won't let them determine their own affairs. When you look at it from their point of view, you can see it. Yeah.
You can read second.
Read second. Yeah, no problem. I'm sorry. How long you been there, man? How long were you there? Okay, I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't notice it. That's how out of it I am. All right. Yeah, so read second period. Okay, no problem.
as the CIA would put it, we're gonna intervene in the civil war. That'll probably do more harm than good.
Mhm. Now, here's just some examples. Remember, Tampico, Mexico, Veracruz, 1914, 1916, chasing Pancho Villa all over northern Mexico, Cuba. And you think of multiple times we got involved in Cuba, 1921 to 1933, we were there. Okay. You know, and the American mafia, y'all, it's a whole nother story, but the mafia, y'all, used Cuba as sort of its base. You know, it was a drug place to get drugs. It was a big gambling center. And as long as the money kept flowing, we were happy with whatever dictator they had. Haiti, several times we've occupied it. Panama, you know, all the time from when we started the revolution to when we built the canal, even to in 1989, the United States invading Panama from the canal zone to force out dictator Manuel Noriega. Okay, so lots and lots of American foreign policy, y'all, has been all about what's happened in Latin America. And like I said, I forgot to put Chile on the list in the 1970s. The United States, our Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, said, Americans just can't stand by and let, you know, let the people of Chile elect a socialist leader, you know, we just can't stand by and let them go socialist. And so we helped some of their military overthrow Allende, a socialist, and Allende ended up being killed. And Chile lived under a rule of a guy by the name of Pinochet, who was quite cruel, quite brutal for a number of years until he himself was overthrown. And, you know, and this has been kind of, sadly, I hate to say, kind of our policy. As long as the people were anti-communist, we didn't really care how, if they were Democrats in the sense of a little d, y'all, if they were for democracy. We only cared that they were anti-communist, right? And it's just not Latin America. We supported some dictators in the Philippines, like the Marcos, the Shah of Iran as well too, because we were putting our needs first. You know, we would rather have a dictator that's stable in those countries than maybe a socialist or definitely a communist government in those countries. So, and it's, you know, it's had some legacies, y'all. There's a lot of mistrust that a lot of these countries have to this very day. I'm not trying to be just negative about America. This is truth. This is fact, and it's something. It's the world you and I live in today. You know, we're paying for some choices we made. Those choices seemed right at the time, but there are consequences to this day of that kind of bullying behavior we've had in a lot of these countries. Now, though America now felt the Caribbean was like a little lake, y'all, and had bases now all through the Pacific, we still would honor George Washington's advice and at least stay out of European affairs. Now, Latin America, Western Hemisphere, that was a whole different thing. But we tried to stay out of European affairs here. And so look at this picture here, y'all. You see Bill of Fare. Now, Puerto Rico is made to look like a pig here, okay? You got the Sandwich Islands, which is what becomes Hawaii. You guys know the Earl of Sandwich invented what? The sandwich. He was a gambler.
He invented the burger.
Yeah, well, he didn't want to, he wanted to be able to hold his cards with one hand and eat with the other. So he instructed the guy to take some bread, put some meat and cheese on it, and then he could hold it with one hand while playing cards with the other, and it became known as the sandwich. That's where that came from. You look at, you know, Cuba steak up here. And so Uncle Sam is saying, well, I hardly know what to take first. And who's his servant? It's President McKinley. So Uncle Sam is hungry. He's got the whole Latin America as well as Hawaii, and he doesn't know yet what to take, okay? Truth is, he'll end up getting involved in all of those. So America stays out of European affairs, y'all, between 1898, and basically we had most of history except for that war with Spain, which wasn't fought in Spain. It was fought, as you guys know, in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. But we stayed out of European affairs. But that would change in 1917 when the United States comes to the aid of Europe and the Allies in World War I. But that's another concept for another time. And we'll go ahead and stop there.